Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. As always, I am your host Martin, and I'm very excited to have you with me for this episode. My guest is Eugene Alliende, and we are going to be discussing his book, Dimensions of Being, An Explorer's Guide to Consciousness. Eugene, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martin. I really appreciate the opportunity here to have this discussion with you.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you on, and I actually got around to finishing your book yesterday. So just to tell the listeners that you had sent me this book, maybe it was back in January, maybe even earlier than that. You sent me a copy of your book many, many months ago, and I slowly got around to reading it, and then I set it aside for a little while because I had other things to do. But I had been intending to bring you on the show for quite some time, so I'm really excited that we're finally here and able to do this.
Yeah, this is great. And I really appreciate the work you're doing, Martin, and really just bringing to consciousness the magic and the power of these tools for the exploration of consciousness.
Well, great. Well, thank you. So to introduce your book a little bit, it's kind of a history of consciousness. I would say that I really enjoy the way that you've laid out the book. So if I could just talk about it for a second here, you have it. It's sort of, like I said, sort of a history of consciousness where you're going through the evolution of the physical structures of the universe and then how consciousness is evolving and changing along with these structures. And then you've broken the mind and consciousness into 8 different levels, and you discuss the evolutionary process and kind of biology and physics around all of these different levels of consciousness. And you've also broken it down into more kind of objective sections. You have practices or exercises that people can do that relates to that particular level of consciousness that you're discussing. And then you also have some autobiographical sections detailing your own experiences with these levels of consciousness, your own work with various medicines and meditations and things like that. So I think it's a very interesting book. I think it's very ambitious. I would describe it as well-researched. You're definitely very well-read in the area. And so it presents a very nice overview for anyone who's interested in this kind of subject in a very detailed fashion. So I definitely enjoyed the book very much and interested in hearing you share your thoughts about all of these things that you include in the book here. But if we could start with maybe learning a little bit about Eugene. Please tell us about yourself.
Okay, well, thank you, Martin. Just a couple of thoughts come up when you ask that question. So the first part is who Eugene is a deeper question, and I think is related to the book.
Yes.
Dimensions of Being. So that's a relative question in a sense. So maybe I'll just start out with what I do right now as a person here. I'm a psychotherapist here in Northern California, and I work with transpersonal and traditional methods to help people, heal and access deeper aspects of themselves so that they can move forward in their own development and growth. I'm a part of this community where we grow food, vegetables, fruits, honey, nuts, and so forth. So that's sort of my other passion is working with the land. But how I got here and how I just came to this sort of exploration of consciousness is kind of a long story, but ever since I was young, I've been intrigued by nature, the forms, the structures, the power, the beauty of nature. So I had this connection to nature ever since I was young, growing up in Chile. Basically, that's where I was born, Santiago, Chile. And then maybe 7th or 8th grade, my uncle Rodrigo gave me a book by Paul Davies called God in the New Physics. Mm-hmm. And this book just blew my mind. And it really opened up the question for me of who are we? Where do we come from? And where is it all going? So that book for me was pivotal in my own intellectual growth in that it opened up at least a question. So that led to a real interest in physics, actually, and started just devouring the books at the time. Stephen Hawking's relativity, quantum mechanics, mm-hmm. and what really intrigued me was this whole notion of a singularity at the beginning of time, that our entire cosmos, this diverse universe, all sprang forth from this unified source. So anyhow, so as I went through high school, I was really into physics. So when I entered college, I wanted to study physics. But my dad, he said, well, physics is a hard career. Why don't you do something with applied physics? So I said, well, okay, that makes sense. So I went into UC Davis as an engineering major. But into the first quarter, I started, sort of developing this low-grade depression, feeling like, this math is really hard. The speculations of theoretical physics, I wasn't finding that inspiration. So I was kind of ready for a change. So a couple months into college, my friend at the time came to me and said, get ready. I'm going to take you to something that is going to blow your mind. And I said, okay, well, I'm ready for a change. So we drove down to San Francisco, and this was the early 90s, 91, 92. And he gave me a small square piece of paper.
Yes.
And at the time, I had no idea what this was. I came from the whole Nancy Reagan era of just say no to drugs, right? So for me, I had no understanding of drugs. I had no interest in drugs. But I was open, I was open. I was a college student. And so anyhow, I put this in my mouth as we crossed the Bay Bridge into San Francisco, and we walk into this warehouse. And all of a sudden, my body starts to dance to this music, to this techno music that it just goes real deep. And about an hour or so into the dancing, things started shifting. The boundary between self and other slowly began to melt. All these lights, sounds, people, everything just began to sort of converge. So I closed my eyes. And what was there was this unified source. In a sense, I went into the singularity. I entered this mystical state of union. And of course, I had no language at that time to describe that. I didn't know what mysticism really was. I didn't know what spirituality was. And then I went, holy shit, the singularity is not something 15 billion years ago. It is here and now.
Yeah.
The source is within me. And then I opened my eyes and I looked all around me, and this singularity was shining through every eye all around me. So, so my world was blown to pieces.
Yes.
So I realized in a flash that, wow, this is God. This is the source, and it's not out there. It's not in some old text. It's within me and within every being in this existence. And that manifestation was only happening for the dance. Well, anyhow, so the party ended, but I was just, torn to pieces. I started to come down from, and this was obviously LSD. And back in those days, pure LSD was sold at the entrance of every rave. So this was my first exposure to any of this. But the following day, my friend and I just wandered around San Francisco just trying to figure out what the heck just happened. I mean, I had nothing in my mental models that I could, reduce this experience to. So the next day at UC Davis, I went straight to the medical library and looked up LSD. I said, what the heck is this? This is, and I couldn't believe that this was not culturally talked about. I mean, this was so huge, so huge and powerful to experience that I just had no idea what this was. Well, I started researching LSD, and then I began to uncover a whole world, a whole philosophy, a whole era. I encountered Ram Dass, Tim Leary, Terence McKenna, meditation, yoga, psychopharmacology, Stan Grof, et cetera, et cetera. And I started to realize that this was an ancient journey into consciousness, that what I had actually tapped into was consciousness, pure consciousness. And so, maybe a month or so after this experience and a couple of others, I changed my major to psychology.
There you go.
It's all in consciousness, right? Even physics. And my minor was religious studies because I started to see that many of the world mystical traditions were basically talking about this experience that I
Right.
had. So yeah, so that sort of opened me up to this whole journey into consciousness. Uh, Maybe about a couple of months after that, I continued to go to these raves and just had incredible experiences. And I hooked up with a group of Mahayana Buddhists and just started meditating, realizing that it's all within. The answers that I was looking for in physics and these deeper questions of humanity, I began to realize are in me, within this thing I call the self. But what was fascinating is that as I started to go deeper into myself, I started to realize that this notion of self is much deeper than I once thought, and actually much deeper than all my courses in psychology were revealing.
Yes.
That in a sense, it really brings you back into the source. We are portals into the source. In an essence, that's who and what we are. So meditation. Then I was just getting incredible results from meditation. I developed a meditation practice. I started practicing yoga, and just really dove into this whole exploration of consciousness. About a year after that, the rave scene started to change. Other drugs started infiltrating the once purely psychedelic scene, and it was no longer safe. I no longer felt safe for this all-out mind expansion at these parties. But so I started to use LSD by myself in the darkness, in the safety of my own home, and just use that particular neurochemical to explore the nature of my own consciousness. So I just began to discover very many things about myself, the nature of reality, how reality is constructed, and how at the core of our cosmos there is a sentience, a beingness that that is expressed throughout, in its diversified forms. But in its core is one thing. So that's a little brief description of sort of how I came into this whole journey into consciousness.
Yes. Well, it's wonderful hearing your story and some of our email exchanges that we've had back and forth that you've mentioned that there's a lot of parallels between my own experiences and your experiences. And I think we're about the same age. And it's just funny just listening to you talk about getting into physics and then going from physics into psychology and religious studies. Because for me, I kind of started out looking at physics and then ended up going into philosophy and religious studies. And so there's just a lot of parallels here. So it's enjoyable to hear you share your story there.
Absolutely. What strikes me is that our generation, we're sort of in the 40s range, and we all came from this early 90s. At least for me, I noticed that there was this renaissance in interest in these psychedelic entheogenic medicines. It's really interesting to me now that we are coming to age and are sort of becoming the elders. The way prior to us, Ram Dass, Alexander Shulgin, all these guys, they're passing on now. So
Yeah.
it's really us that have to sort of bring this gnosis that we are rediscovering in our culture, and this new interest in these medicines. I think is timely because we need anything and everything we can throw into this because our planet is definitely struggling and suffering in many ways.
Yeah. It's time. It's definitely time. And it's a great pleasure to be a part of it and to have your contribution as well. There's so much information here in your book. So let's talk about your process of writing this book. And how did you get the idea of that you were going to break things down into these 8 levels? Maybe we could talk about that first of all, because that really structures the entire book.
Yes, right. Well, the book actually came into being back in 2000. It was my thesis for my master's degree in transpersonal psychology. So
Wow.
basically, after I graduated Davis, I realized, well, I want to apply this. And if the world, part of what my eyes were open to through all this work was the vast suffering people suffering, the planetary suffering, the biological suffering. So in a sense, I wanted to do something, be a part of the healing in some way, because as I was healing myself by actually remembering who I really am,
Mm-hmm.
I realized this is what's going on. We have lost our connection to our true nature. We've lost our connection to each other, to the planet, and to the cosmos. So part of the healing I, thought was to sort of break down that illusory boundary between us and the rest of the universe, and really bring people back into a sense of just connection. So I thought, okay, well, logically, I'll do psychology, and then transpersonal psychology really spoke to me because it really integrated some of these mystical states with the sort of developmental journey of the human being. And
Mm-hmm.
Stan Grof did a lot of work in the transpersonal field, and also Ken Wilber, and those two were very influential to me. So So I wrote this thesis back in 2000 to really explore the evolution of consciousness, because what I began to realize is that consciousness, as a very deep phenomena, um, is expressed in various levels and stages. So if we take it back to the singularity, to the source, and if truly this pure consciousness that I tap into in my deepest mystical states is truly one with the singularity, then sentience and consciousness is not a product of the brain, but somehow embedded in space-time itself.
Yes.
So I thought, well, so how do I talk about this? And in a sense, if it isn't here now, it isn't. Okay, so that's what I reasoned. So I thought, well, if I can't experience these levels right now as I'm writing this, then it's just more mental masturbation. In other words, just more thoughts, words, ideas, concepts.
Yeah.
And I wasn't interested in that. I wanted something that I could touch and feel. So I started the question with, what is the one thing I know for certain, without a shadow of a doubt? And what came to me in my meditation is the only thing I really know is that I am.
Yes.
That's it. I don't know that I am a product of the brain. I don't know that I am, a spirit. I don't know any of that. Those are just words. All I know right now is that I exist as a being. So that's the foundation of and ground of being, is the sense of I amness. Now, this I amness then gets incarnated, right, into, start as a baby, first of all. And so what is that I am, how is that I am manifesting, say, in an infant, or a cell, for instance? And basically that I am at that level begins to experience the physical universe. There's sort of a crystallization of this consciousness into form. And so the first level that I noticed was that this form is survival, basically as this I amness, which is vast, infinite, and timeless, eventually arises in form. And so then the entire journey of consciousness is an unfolding process of form in space and time. But the more that this consciousness is unfolds, it expresses itself in greater freedom, greater creativity, greater self-knowing, and so I noticed that there was this evolutionary process. Now, of course, this is not new. This is the ancient perennial philosophy that the great chain of being that has been discussed throughout the ages in different forms. But I wanted to sort of contextualize it within the current scientific theories. So if we start with the assumption that the I amness, that pure consciousness, is the ground of being, that is the singularity, then how does that consciousness evolve through space and time?
Yes.
So anyhow, so it was an intellectual but also an experiential journey, and I wanted to sort of map my own development onto sort of the cosmic evolution of things, which, like you say, it was very ambitious, but it was really, really fun to do. So maybe if you want, we can go through the stages and levels and sort of see what they are.
Yeah, let's definitely talk about that. And I would just first comment that I think what's really significant here is that you're taking this on at both the personal and the universal level, and that you're looking at this evolution of consciousness in order to understand yourself, not as an object that's exterior from your experience, but really getting to the heart of how does this relate to me and who I really am, because that's really the important question here. That we can talk about consciousness and physics and reality as much as we want, but if we're not getting back to, well, how does that relate to me and my experience, then, as you say, it's a form of mental masturbation. But here, this is the delving into the depth of your own being and understanding that this entire process is the larger self. That's something that I really appreciate about the work that you have here. So yes, let's get into the different levels, please.
Right, exactly. Well, the whole notion of the fractal, which I know you talk quite a bit about in your work, is the fact that each part is, in essence, a reflection of the whole. So if we want to understand the cosmos as a whole, I think it's very fruitful to look at the self and how we as individuals e- evolve and develop through time.
Mm-hmm.
So first and foremost is the source, right? So and the source is an undifferentiated, non-dual sort of field, right? Physics tells us that everything at that source and at the beginning is completely unified. Well, mysticism tells us the same thing, that everything arises from this pure consciousness, this universal field that is unified and conscious. Now, this is where science sort of disagrees. Science says, well, no, this is a physical, material thing. But what we experience is not that it's just that life is a material, physical thing. We experience beingness. And that in itself is a mystery. We can rationalize, describe it in physical, technical, neurological terms, but the mystery of being remains.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of a lot of arguing and debating and talking, there's being. So I take that as a foundation. And furthermore, this being is changeless. Everything else is changing. The body's changing, my emotions are changing, my thoughts are constantly changing. This self-construct that we call the ego is also always changing. But there's an underlying beingness that does not change. So for me, with that question that I asked myself, what is the only thing I know? Being was the foundation, the truth with a capital T, reality with a capital R.
Yes.
That is the foundation, the ground. Not as a theory, not as a belief, not as a philosophy or religion, but as a deeply felt experience.
Yes.
Now, so now this beingness, of course, manifested into structures we called atoms. These atoms came together, coagulated, created stars. Stars exploded, created solar systems. Solar systems, out of those emerged the Earth, this beautiful blue planet that, and all these physical structures were manifesting. But something inside the material structure was networking parts into wholes, was somehow bringing everything together. And my sense is that it's the sentience this within everything that was orchestrating this whole process.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, science is not willing to sort of bring that on board, but I think it's the only way to explain the fact that we are moving forward in this time-space continuum towards greater complexity, greater beauty, greater harmony, and greater consciousness. So my sense is that this conscious field then somehow incarnated into matter, and from that started to sort of evolve forward in time. Then we have the Earth, and out of this material soup of chemistry and chemicals, somehow, somewhere, life emerges. Now, it's a real stretch to really buy into the materialistic biology that all of a sudden all this dead matter came together and suddenly, boom, we have the right ingredients and now we have a sentient life.
Right.
For me, that's really hard to sort of make that leap from dead matter into life. For me, a much more satisfactory view is that this consciousness, this pure awareness that has incarnated into form, at the moment that there was enough complexity for life to arise, this consciousness now was able to express itself in a much greater, deeper way. So this was just a part of the continuum. But life, the first level then is the material plane, right? And the first purpose of this is to survive, basically to maintain these separate structures so that they continue to evolve and pass on the inherited patterns.
Yes.
So the first level in my book is, the material plane, and it's physical survival. It's basically adopting all the programs so that this inner sentience, this inner non-local conscious sentience can keep these physical structures safe and alive and surviving. So that's the first programming, and it's based on approach avoid. Something is sweet and nurturing and nourishing, you go towards it. If it's hard, poisonous, dangerous, you retreat. And this approach avoid is basically imprinted in our own very cells. Every cell of our bodies has this basic program. And we, at our deepest level of physical incarnation, have this basic program. If it's safe and pleasurable, we go towards it. If it's dangerous, we move away from it. No matter what we're talking about, thinking about, that is the basis. Right now, if a truck, rams into this building, I'm going to stop this podcast and run away, right? That's
I hope so.
Yeah, it's the physical survival, right? It overrides everything that goes above that. It's the basis of this form. Well, as life evolves in complexity, we move through time and space, and then all the way into the multicellular sort of organisms and mammals, a new brain evolves over the reptilian brainstem. And basically the reptilian brainstem is the basic structure that really keeps the organism alive. In our own system, it's the brain that keeps the heart beating, the breathing process going, digestion, etc. So it's the autonomic physical survival. Well, when the mammals came into being, this new brain evolved, the limbic brain, which was able to facilitate a whole new dimension of consciousness. It's the beginning of the emotional brain, and we have the mammals now taking care of their young instead of just laying eggs and going away. Now there's a new connection, there's a new interaction, a new relationship between the maternal figure and the baby. So a new dimension of consciousness is facilitated and moves through this new brain. And I call that the second level, which is the emotional level of consciousness. Now, as we're sitting here and as your listeners are listening to this, you can tap into this dimension of your being as basically the emotions you're feeling right now. What are we feeling in this moment? The prior level, the physical level, we can also feel it right now as we're sitting here as our sensations. A little back pain, a little, tickle here. The basic sensations that our sensory system is relaying to us, to this inner witness, this inner silent consciousness. So the first level is, of course, ruled by the senses. The senses determine this particular level. And our five senses are only tuned into a certain spectrum of frequencies. And of course, it's a very small spectrum, as we are finding out. The emotional brain is facilitated again by this, it facilitates this dimension of consciousness, which we call emotions. Now, into sort of maybe 1 million years ago, the emotional mammal begins to evolve. Social organization becomes more complex, and a new structure begins to arise out of that limbic brain, which we call the cortex. This new development in biology and in neurology allows for the emergence of something completely new in this universe. Thought, concept, ideas, symbols. Mm-hmm. And that in itself is a whole different layer, different plane of reality. It's not the physical realm. It's not an emotional sort of relatedness realm. It's a conceptual realm of symbols, ideas, concepts. So this initiates the Homo sapien journey into culture, right? Of course, Terence McKenna thinks this was facilitated by our encounter with the mushroom. I think that's a very compelling idea. I'm not sure how we can prove that, but it's very interesting because it really points to some interesting thoughts about how nature itself is sort of involved in our own evolutionary process, that it's not just random, that there's some sort of intelligence there.
Hmm.
Well, anyhow, so that's the third level there, the conceptual mental level that we all sort of have. And we can immediately tap into that level right now as we notice what we're thinking. These are thoughts. Animals don't have thoughts. We do. So this is really a human thing. And then the fourth level in the first four, which I call the personal domains, is the self construct, the ego, the ego personality, which is which basically sort of evolves when the prefrontal cortex comes online. This newest part of our brain, and some scientists believe that sort of emerged about 40,000 years ago, which makes a lot of sense, right? This is where we're experimenting with fire, campfire, and then the agricultural revolution allows humanity to settle in villages and so forth and so on. So that we begin to acquire a sense of self that is self-referential.
Hmm.
So basically using the prior level of the mental level to really sort of create a cognitive conceptual notion of me versus not me. And we call that the ego, right? Now the thing is that this ego is, by its nature, defines itself separate from something else.
Yes.
And so that ego then goes forth and creates history, what we call human history. We run, through the whole gamut there of just the ego manifesting as the emperor, the king, the queen, and then this entire diversity of personality and social caste and social structures then developed out of this particular structure of self and not self. And of course, we can all sort of access that realm right now. Who do we think we are, right? I can say, well, I'm Eugene, and I'm a therapist, and I'm a Chilean, and I'm a this. But these are all self-notions, self-referential notions that are cognitive thoughts. These are thoughts. They're really nothing real other than what my mind is producing as symbols and ideas and associations.
Right.
So anyhow, so that's very useful to navigate the world. We all need a little ego there. But if this is our sole identity, then we run into some problems. And this is what Buddha realized, that the body and the ego are impermanent. They're not, they will eventually die. So he came to this first noble truth that there is impermanence, old age, sickness, and death. And this, for him, initiated his quest to understand what and who we are, and also, is there a way out of this suffering? Is there a way out of this inevitable death? And that, of course, initiates that entire spiritual journey, which brings us to the next four levels, which I call the transpersonal levels.
Okay, so just to quickly summarize then, we're starting with the physical, then we're moving into the mental, and then the construction of thoughts through concepts, this abstraction from the physical realm, where we're able to think about it and conceptualize it, and then we're parsing things into different categories, and then through that, we are developing a mental notion of ourselves, our own self-perception, and generating ideas of who it is that we think we are. So those are the first four levels, and then we're getting into the transpersonal, which moves then beyond that into the wider notion of the self. Yes?
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. And and most of humanity, coincidentally, is functioning at the third and the fourth level. I mean, most people believe themselves to be, this personality construct, this ego.
Yes.
And which is fine, but I think evolution is inviting us to move beyond that limited, separate notion of who we are. And once we start exploring the deeper notions of who and what we are, again, we begin to see that who and what we are is much deeper than this little self that we've been calling ourselves as. So anyhow, so now the thing about the ego level is that it identifies only with its cognitive structure. It really separates itself from the body. It really is very mental in nature, and in a sense, it's almost very disconnected even from its own emotional systems. It's a very sort of mental sort of identity structure. The fifth level, Ken Wilber called it the centaur, which is sort of the union of the animal body with the sort of the human psyche. And the whole sort of thrust of the fifth level is to reunite the body and the mind, to become an integrated organism, to, in a sense, reclaim what was previously in the unconscious. For instance, in the fourth level, when we identified just with the ego, the body was an unconscious thing. There was something we called the unconscious, these forces within that, Freud said could overwhelm the fragile, civilized ego at any moment. So we developed sort of a dichotomy between the small self and the unconscious, quote unquote. Well, in the fifth level, we begin to reclaim the body, the emotions, the id, our sexuality. And this is all sort of connected to the human potential movement and the humanistic psychologies of really healing the split between the mind and the body. Now, the exemplar of this is the yogi. The yogi is a being who is able to really master the physiology, the body, and really make conscious what to the little ego in the previous level was unconscious. Mm-hmm. So the fifth level is all about just becoming a master of your own body, your own physiology, and really being connected with that. Some entheogens that sort of help facilitate that are, for instance, cannabis. Cannabis is a wonderful aid to reconnecting us to the physiology, to the body, making conscious things that were before unconscious. So that's the fifth level. And in history, I think that the 60s was sort of a breakthrough into sort of becoming more holistic in that sense. We reclaimed sexuality. We reclaimed the body as not something sinful or something, separate, but as something that is sacred and divine. Mm-hmm. And the external sort of manifestation of that is the ecological movement. See, the ego created the Industrial Revolution. With the ego, we had the divisions that allowed us to create science and industrialization and all this. But just like the ego in the fourth level separated itself from the body and made it unconscious, the Industrial Revolution made biology unconscious. In other words, biology was not a living thing. It's something to extract, break down, and use for our own use, for our own development. So with the whole sort of dissolving the split between the mind and the body at the individual level, I see that as a collective movement towards bringing culture and nature back together. In other words, bringing nature back on board as a living entity, as a sacred part of who and what we are. Mm-hmm. So then the sixth level. So that's the fifth level is this healing the split between the mind and the body. Now, the sixth level, for me, sort of was revealed with my experiences at those raves. When I started going to those raves, I remember I'd just kind of park my body sort of in a corner there, let the body move to the music, but I would close my eyes and I began to sort of go into deeper transpersonal states where all this information was displayed. So everything that was previously quote unquote unconscious became conscious.
Yes.
And I began to, in other words, look at the programming behind my personality, behind perception, behind this body awareness. I became acquainted to a much deeper level of awareness, where I saw my personality as just a set of programs. I saw, everything as just configurations of energy, of information, that this deeper witnessing awareness was identifying with in the normal day-to-day life. But in these deeper states of consciousness, I was able to sort of extricate myself from identity to the separate structures and saw it as just energy, just configurations of pure energy. So LSD was wonderful for that. But then once I got involved with mindful meditation, I realized that we can really live from that place. And in my book, I call it the psychic plane, in the sense that you can live from a deeper place where where you can become a master of your reality. Basically, you can see how your thoughts, in a sense, manifest as experiences. If I have a negative set of thoughts, my experience is going to be a negative experience. My perception is going to be negative, and vice versa. So really, at that level, now you're beginning to look under the hood, in a sense, and see what the programming is of your individual self. And for me, meditation has become my way of accessing that realm pretty consistently. Now, as we go deeper inward, we begin to, I began to experience deeper energies, deeper forces within me that weren't personal, were not from my particular heritage in biology. And this is where we start entering sort of what our entheogenic community is so enthralled with, which is what many call the shamanic realm, the visionary realm, the realm of entities, of sentiences, of beings. And so now that realm for me was accessed by my exploration of the plants. The plants in particular were particular keys that allowed me to see this aspect of reality that before I had no idea even existed. So that's the seventh realm there. That's the realm of what the shamans call the spirit realm, the realm of the subtle plane, the visionary realm. This is where religions and spiritual traditions throughout the globe, this is where they talk about the deities, the Bardo realm, so the wrathful and peaceful deities, et cetera, et cetera. These are personifications and anthropomorphic sort of expressions of deeper energies. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of the seventh realm, and then finally, once you start to look at these energies, these quote unquote beings and entities, and you begin to explore the nature of what those things are, you begin to realize that this is all just a play of consciousness, that these quote unquote beings are just aspects of consciousness. And you do a great job in really kind of piercing through that and saying, yes, okay, there's that energy, that being, but who is that? What is that?
Yeah.
And finally, we go through that doorway and we realize it's just us. It's just that consciousness that is manifesting in this hierarchy of expressions and manifestations. And of course, the final level, the eighth level, to go back a little bit, so every level has a witness, from the physical to the emotional to the mental to the egoic to the whole body organism to the psychic to the subtle. All those levels has a witness, a being in there that is aware of the sensations, a being that is aware of the emotions, aware of the thoughts, aware of the visions.
Right.
But who is that witness, right? So in the eighth level is where the witness sort of looks at itself. And that's where it becomes very interesting, because when we shine that light of awareness on itself, it disappears. It basically disappears into itself. And that is that traditional mystical union, which I was introduced to at that first rave in 1992 on LSD. That is the singularity. The singularity is the witness that has inhabited each of those dimensions from the very beginning to this final realization of who and what it is. So at the eighth level, you merge. You enter this source in what traditionally is called Nirvikalpa Samadhi or Nirdo, or the upper jhana states of Buddhism. These are all just different maps that talk about that formless essence that is who we are at the core of our existence, and it happens to be one thing. As we look into the skies, we see all the different planets, and each planet reflects different hues of light, different frequencies. But if we really take a look, those planets aren't reflecting their own light. They're reflecting the one sun.
Hmm.
So that one light is being diffracted in various frequencies and forms, but it's one light. Well, I see all humanity as really the different planets reflecting the one light that is that inner heart, sun, source. Um, well, so okay, so once we move into that oneness, once we merge into the witness, then what? Is the journey over? Well, many yogic traditions and renuncia traditions say, yes, that's it. Once you realize who you truly are beyond space and time, you've reached the summit of evolution of consciousness. You've returned to the omega, and you've become who you ultimately always was and were. Um, well, many traditions say, well, no, no, that's just the beginning. Once you've realized who you are, then you return to your incarnation. You return to your life. You return to your family, and then you live from a place of consciousness, a place of love, a place of altruism, because you realize that we are all a family and we are all part of the same eternal being. Um, and that brings us to that non-dual stance, the non-dual sort of realization that we are both one with spirit, but simultaneously a separate individual, right? So we're
Yeah.
both.
Yeah. This crazy paradox.
Exactly, exactly. And then of course you look around and you see, well, the universe wants to manifest. The universe wants to evolve. It doesn't want to just to disappear nirvikalpa samadhi.
Yeah.
There's something about the spiritual unfolding that wants to manifest into greater beauty, greater art, greater creativity, greater novelty. So part of the intuition then is that we are here also to continue this evolutionary art project that we call the cosmos.
Yes.
It's not just to transcend it, but to return to it and do our part in this ongoing manifestation. But doing it from a place of freedom, which is very different than doing it from a place of attachment and identity to those lower structures.
Yes.
And so this non-dual thing is something that I've been, playing with and working with ever since, I sort of uncovered this thing, and it's been a beautiful journey ever since.
Yeah. To just comment on something that you just mentioned, one of the ironies of spiritual practice that you raise here is that many people who have this idea of reaching the full samadhi, of reaching the non-dual state, and viewing that as the end point, that to kind of put an ironic twist on it, mystics to some degree are trying to get out of reality. They're just trying to go into the unitary state, whereas the countervailing force is that God is continually trying to get into reality.
Right.
That's the whole thrust of reality itself, is that God is looking to manifest as diverse forms, and that the real challenge is to participate in the diversity of the seemingly dualistic world that we live in with consciousness and clarity, and not it's not, well, let's all just evaporate out of here. Let's go into oneness and never come back, and that's the fulfillment of the journey, because obviously God has invested a great deal of time and energy in there being a reality, so that there is an evolutionary purpose to what's going on here. And really, I see that as that's where we are at the evolutionary forefront of consciousness and reality, is how do we live with this in reality with each other, with our families and our jobs and our environmental issues and our politics and all the rest of that, not to cop out of reality, but to fully be present within reality, in that fully embodied, fully conscious state. That's what I see as the ultimate thrust
Exactly.
of evolution, so that then we're not just participating in this game unconsciously, we're not just at the whim of the game, but we can be active participants in the game. And that's where I see your book is leading towards, is encouraging us to not just have the realization, but then realize that we're part of this ongoing, unfolding evolutionary drama, and that we are all free participants within that. So,
Exactly.
so participate consciously.
Exactly. Well, and what brings it home is this whole sense of presence. What is this presence? What is this awareness that we are before we call ourselves a name, before this presence identifies with this particular body? What is that presence?
Yeah.
And that presence is that source, is the fulfillment, is the omega. So in a sense, if we tap into presence right now as we're speaking here, this presence uh, behind the words is the liberation, is the salvation, is nirvana.
Yeah.
So we are it. It's not like we have to get somewhere. We are it. And now from that ground, we now inject ourselves into form and create and co-create this vast cosmos that we inhabit. So part of the freedom is to really learn to just return to that presence over and over again. And Ram Dass called it the only dance there is. So in a sense, involuting and coming into that freedom and peace that we are, so that we can then come back. As Joseph Campbell said, the hero's journey is to go out into that void, but then return to the marketplace, but with a new gnosis, with a new sort of secret that really we're already enlightened, we're already God. With it,
Yeah.
it's nothing that needs to change. So then we just kind of come back to the play and enjoy the ride, and help others realize that basic gnosis, because the suffering is based on our forgetting that we are always connected, that we are eternal, that there really is no time, that the time is just sort of something we are creating for the fun of it, really.
Yeah. And within all that is also the notion that this is our fundamental ground of being. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's not going anywhere. It's right here. It's right now. And it really turns this spiritual quest on its head in a sense that there really isn't anything to do. There really isn't anything to achieve. It's not like you need to become enlightened. You don't need to become a mystic. You don't need to become anything. Really, the goal is, how do I relax all of my striving of trying to be something and conceptualize myself to just uncover what's always been there? I mean, it's the most effortless thing you could ever possibly do.
Exactly.
just
Yeah.
just allow that. And it's so hard for people to understand that when they get caught up in a spiritual quest of always feeling like, well, I need to reach this next goal or reach this next milestone or whatever that may be, when it actually it's the stripping away. And I really like that where you started personally with your own quest is trying to understand, well, who is this me that I think I am? And that's really the place to investigate. Is it's a process of uncovering awareness of the self and finding deeper levels of awareness. And it's right there. It's just right there if people just look at it. And
Exactly.
it's not a searching outward. It's a relaxing into what's always been there and always will be there, is just this non-dual unitary consciousness and being. It's just what we are, but we spend so much time intellectually covering that over, or through our activities and our identifications, that we're always trying to hide that from ourselves. So what I see as the dance is that God is always trying to get its individual versions of itself to wake up, that there's this ongoing invitation. It's like you can wake up any moment. And the ego is always going through this process of trying to cover that over because it doesn't want to expose the fact that it's just a construct. So that's where the dance is. And that's, like at level 7 that you're talking about here in your schematics, is that's where this deepest level of communication is taking place between God and the individual that's perceiving itself. And so the information that's being passed back and forth is always grounded in this fundamental invitation of recognize all of this as you. Go ahead, wake up, and look at the amazing diversity of what this unitary consciousness is. We've got beings and architecture and realms and all of this stuff, and it's all just this very simple invitation. Oh, just wake up. This is you.
Right. Yeah, and it's amazing. Yeah, and then the path is the goal, right? So it's this
Yes.
ever present beingness. But the thing is that to get to that realization, so that's the absolute, right? That's the absolute realization, the non-dual realization that we are enlightenment. Enlightenment, the inner light of consciousness, is and what we have always been. But to get to that realization, there is a process, you know.
Yes.
We can tell people, no, it's just who you are, and so just relax into it. But most people aren't ready to hear that. So there is sort of a growth, a maturation, a developmental process of purification in a sense that eventually leads to that realization. Now, of course, that realization could happen at any point and any time for individuals, and it happens all the time. But for a lot of us, we have to sort of move through certain stages before we come to that realization.
Yes.
And that's when, yoga and purification and sort of, clean diet and all that sort of thing helps. And also work with the medicine. See, the medicine help uncover and recover, the basic gnosis of who we are. Um, so there is that sort of relative movement towards
Yes.
greater expansion, greater understanding, deeper connection, while simultaneously at the absolute level, you realize there's nothing to uncover because you're already it. It's you and it's everything around you. It's what is.
Yeah, it's like revealing the greatest joke ever. That, when you finally get it, it's like, oh, this is all.
Right.
This is what it's always been, and I just didn't recognize it. And yeah, I really want to emphasize the point that you made that it's a process, and that it's important for anyone who is striving along this process to respect that process for themselves. That I often see people who get critical of themselves that feel like, well, I haven't learned enough, or I should be free of my illusions already, or I shouldn't be doing this to myself at this point. And it's a process, and everyone is free to respect where they are when they're there, and have no judgments or any attachments about that. That wherever you are it's perfect for you in that moment, and if you can respect that, then it helps you relax more and then go deeper.
Exactly. Exactly. And that developmental process also opens up our capacity to hold this non-dual realization. Because it's not easy to hold. We get lost in our egoic movements. We get lost in our emotional storms or our physical pains, for instance. But our capacity to continually return to that realization, that understanding, that knowing, I think does evolve over time, and we mature into that. Uh, Even though once we've touched it, there's no going back. Once you've touched the reality of who you truly are, you're just it. You're just there, right? But then manifestation continues to unfold. Your karmic process continues to unfold lawfully according to your experiences in life. But once you've touched that freedom, there's no going back to the prison.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think there's definitely a place to continually refine the vessel, to continually purify, to choose a salad instead of a Big Mac, to although if you're free, you could go for the Big Mac, and you'll be fine. Just your capacity to be in resonance with that deeper consciousness will sort of be diminished, right? Because there are these sort of physical factors that we're all working with as well. Um,
And
and
also,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, also what I like about this is that it just using the language that you're using here is that this provides a model for what is genuine psychological health, in a sense.
Mm.
That given that these are all the different aspects, the multifaceted aspects of our being and of our awareness, that so much of what passes for psychological health within our contemporary culture and society is really taking place at these lower levels that you're describing here. And so how can we have a psychological model for the whole human being, the maturation of the human being, of including these higher levels, yet also grounding us within our everyday reality? Again, going back to the kind of maybe the stereotype of the mystic or the yogi or the saint of, I'm just going to wall myself up in a cave, I'm going to reach samadhi, and then see y'all later because I'm just going to evaporate out of here. How do we reach a mature point where we can embrace this aspect of ourselves, yet still just simply be present within reality, be present with each other? And that's where I see the greatest potential for not only personal individual health and mental and emotional and physical well-being, but also societal and cultural and really global health and well-being. And that's also what your book is pointing towards, that this is about, we live in a very precarious time at the moment where we're encountering climate change. We look at the political situation or cultural situations, and it's very dangerous right now. And so we desperately need a greater level of maturity in our self-awareness so that we can get over the illusions and the crap that we keep throwing at each other. And I think that this presents a very good model for what that would include.
Yes. Right, absolutely, because I think you're right, and you talk quite a bit about this in your work, is that the ego can be dangerous if it's really, because the ego is paranoid. It wants to preserve itself. It wants to impose boundaries between self and other. The ego creates religions and nationalities and ideologies, and then feels the need to protect these certain constructs with force. So part of, I think, what the issue is in this planet is that the consciousness has overly identified with this limited sense of self.
Yes.
And protects it with fervor and is fueled by this animal emotionality. Now, and that's created the havoc on this planet. The ego separates itself from the not self. That's its nature. And part of the not self is nature, is others, is other cultures, minorities, etc. Therefore, imposing these arbitrary boundaries between self and other. And I think you're right. I mean, part of this movement beyond that, transcending that, is to really understand at the individual level that that's not all we are. That we are literally an extension of a deep universal force in consciousness. And if we ground our everyday lives in that knowing, in that experience, again, not as an intellectual concept or another theory, but as a living presence, then I think it's much harder to kill your neighbors if you realize that those neighbors are another aspect of yourself.
Yeah, and that maybe what's threatening you from your neighbors is that you've put a boundary up between you and that neighbor is pushing on that boundary. And so really the discomfort is your own. So it's about this personal responsibility to recognize, oh, I'm afraid because this makes me uncomfortable or this challenges my own notions, my own thoughts. But is that really something that I need to exteriorize onto this other person or onto this situation? Because it allows us to take ownership. So that, there's nothing wrong with developing identities and saying, well, I'm a part of this culture, I'm a part of this religion or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about being able to own that and say, well, this is my choice, and that I don't need to feel threatened by other people who are choosing something different, that it's not something that I need to kill or die for, because it's just a choice that I've made.
Exactly.
And I'm going to take responsibility for that.
Exactly, and that's just a stage. When I work with adolescents, it's all about creating a healthy sense of self.
Yeah.
You're creating a strong ego there, and you want the adolescent to identify with, a certain group or its racial heritage or whatever, because that's its stage of development. But I think as a humanity, we need to move beyond that limited identity structure, and move into a more world-centric versus ethnocentric perspective. So part of, you can look at it as, you go from egocentric, as children are, to ethnocentric, which adolescents become ethnocentric in the sense that they identify with a group. But we need to move into world-centric, where we identify with the humanity, with the planet, not just our own race, our own culture, our own particular ideology. So it really is a sort of call towards maturation.
Yes.
And this is where I find that the entheogens play a role in all this, because in our tool set here, we need to use every available tool. And I think it's becoming very apparent that there are no tools more powerful than these entheogens to shed some light into the nature of who and what we are. This whole construct of the ego is very easily dissolved, once you start to work with these medicines. And they have the potential. And of course, they're not, the magic bullet. There's the set and setting, and there's definitely sort of the context and the maps you want to work with here. But there are no tools more powerful on this planet, as far as we know, uh, that can shed that kind of light onto the nature of our own being.
And it's nice that we are now living in a time where people are really beginning to openly recognize this. I think most of the mystical traditions around the world, they've recognized this for a long time, and a lot of it has been kept secret.
Mm.
But now we're at a point where, we're here on this podcast. We can discuss this openly. And of course, there are still lots of legal concerns, and we're still grappling with this bizarre war on drugs that we're experiencing in the modern world. But it's changing very, very rapidly, and I think it's going to change more quickly than people might imagine. I think that just the status of marijuana is a good indication of where things are going. That, when I was a teenager and started arguing for why marijuana was good as medicine or why it was safer and more productive than alcohol or anything like that, I never thought that we'd be where we are today, where here in Oregon, it's very likely it's going to be legalized for recreational use this very year. And, I have good friends that have just been opening up medical marijuana dispensaries. And this is all something that's out in the open. People accept it. People understand the value of it. And the science and the genuine knowledge is really coming out into the open. And I think it's going to be a watershed. So I think that we're living on the edge of some radical changes that are going to be happening and are happening right now. So I think it's a very, very exciting time for recognition of these tools and their acceptance within society.
Yes, absolutely. And, and cannabis is part of this sort of greater sort of um, grouping of plants, of medicinal plants that have been used traditionally and shamanically for healing for thousands of years. So yeah, to lump all these sort of substances in one nice little category is completely ignorant. And we definitely need to grow as a society in understanding and knowledge. And this knowledge, has been known, but it's continually repressed and suppressed. These entheogens are a completely different class of substances, particularly the ones that are plant-based, because they have a long history of usage, and they're within a healing and spiritual context. So I think you're right. I think there's going to be incredible change happening here in the next couple of years, and especially with all the work that MAPS is doing in researching these entheogens and psychedelics as genuine tools for healing, for therapeutic processes, and spiritual development. And not to use them, I think, is a tragedy, because we really need everything we can, use at this point in time.
Yeah, the time is definitely now. We've got to shape up, or we're already in deep trouble, I think, with climate change. I think that that's relatively unstoppable at this point. So the
Yeah.
more clarity we can get within these tumultuous times that we're heading towards, it can only be of value. I mean, for people who don't believe in climate change, for example, I mean, here we are. I'm in Ashland right now. It's the middle of the summer. I've lived here for 6 or 7 years now. Every summer has been completely dry, just dry to the bone. And
Yeah.
we've been having massive thunderstorms for the past few weeks. This is completely out of the ordinary for our climate region. I mean, things are changing, and this is just the beginning. And if we're going to continue with our petty denials and accusations and the rest of what's going on with regarding what's happening to the planet, we're in for some serious, serious trouble. It's going to be hard enough just dealing with reality on its own, let alone the illusions and projections and attachments that we put onto it. That the time for clarity is now more than ever. And
Yeah, exactly. And these technologies, the internet, the web, I think are, I think part of the solution, in the sense that it's accelerating the conversation. I mean, it's
yes,
allowing us to really communicate in ways that was never before possible. And I think it's the accelerator that we need to really spread this awareness and the practices that will help sort of shift the balance a little bit. But it's hard to know, because we're still full force consumer society, and based on the economic growth and all this stuff, and and the real conversation is not happening on CNN or NBC or NPR, you know. Maybe they touch upon it here and there, but then they go back to the silly bickerings between
Yeah.
these political parties that, you know, in a sense, they're not really addressing the core issue here. And the core issue in my mind is that we're disconnected. We are disconnected. Um, we have no sense of relatedness, and really that's toxic right now in our planet because, you know, the planet is becoming smaller. And so what I do today affects completely what happens, you know, on the other side of the planet in terms of what I choose to consume or do. So,
Yeah, we have lost the luxury of being ignorant at this
yeah,
point, I think.
absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, so you know, but I'm also hopeful because these
Yeah.
inner experiences show me that there is a deep sentience, there is a deep consciousness behind this whole unfolding process, and somehow this inner spirit is, you know, is okay with all of it because it is just an expression, it is just a manifestation of being, and it's always been that way. It's always been the dance between the dark and the light, between the negative and the positive. It's what makes the spin happen,
Yeah.
right? Uh, you know, the other day I was talking to a friend and I said, well, you know, right now we're in the biggest epic ever, you know, good and evil are in its at its height, and that's the movie that we go and pay for, is to see that massive epic, you know, battle between the good and the evil, the light and the dark. Will we make it? You know, that's always the question. Are we going to make it through? But you know, if you notice the archetype of every movie, the good guys always win. Right before the whole thing is going to blow up, boom, you know, the good guys save the day. I think it's embedded in our mythologies. It's embedded in everything. So in a sense, I have a deep faith that it's all unfolding right as it needs to.
Yeah. And I think, just to reiterate one of your comments, one of the craziest aspects of all of this is that from the unitary non-dual perspective, everything's totally fine.
Right.
It's totally cool. Everything is perfect all the time. And part of the crazy balance is understanding that yes, everything's totally fine, but as embodied human beings that are living in this reality, we have a lot of choices we can make, and there's a lot that we are responsible for. And that if we want to live in a better world, it's totally up to us, that we can make of it what we want, that we have that freedom, we have that ability. So even though everything's perfect, it doesn't absolve us of personal responsibility and personal choice. And so it's this crazy paradox that everything's one, but I'm still here and you're still there, and we're still dealing with every ordinary thing within mundane reality, and it's all perfect and we don't need to be attached to anything, but that also doesn't mean that apathy is the solution.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's that non-dual stance, isn't it?
Yeah.
That in one sense it's all perfect and it's all the way it needs to be. And on the other hand, what we do matters. Every choice, every word, every thought matters in the overall scheme of things.
Yeah.
And that choice is moment to moment. So the more we tap into that ever-present awareness that we are, I think the more we can sort of extract that luminosity and that light from that and shine it on our everyday actions and experiences and interactions. So that there's a constant sort of dialogue between the ever-present perfection of it all and the unfolding structures of space and time that we are part of.
Yes.
And that's when it becomes fun. You know, that's when life
Yeah.
becomes a real fun sort of creative act. And so we can really become true artists in our own life process. That we don't have to be locked into a set of ideas or constructs or thoughts of who we think we are. Uh, we can be God and you know, individuals at the same time. And then that dance allows a real freedom, a real sort of creative edge to the whole thing.
Yeah. And it's fun. That's something I really want to emphasize, is that it's fun. Being alive is like the greatest thing ever. It's so much fun. There's so much to do and experience that sometimes when people get on these quests for self-realization, that people get really serious and they take everything really seriously. And this is one of the things I like to encourage people is just lighten up. And,
Right.
sometimes put a little spin on it. Enlighten up. Take it easy. It's okay. It really is okay. And no
Yes.
matter what you experience, it's okay. But it doesn't mean that you need to set aside all your personal preferences and choices. Those are okay too. It's all okay. And the more fun you can have with yourself, just the better it is for everyone involved.
Exactly, because then you emanate that vibration, and through that vibration, you help others feel at ease, feel like, oh wait, it's okay to laugh, it's okay to smile. That's I often ask that question. For instance, I get a client and they say, well, I'm really depressed. My question is, well, what's keeping you from having fun? What's keeping you from being alive and fully embracing this journey that you're on? What is it that's blocking that? Because that's a fundamental question. We have this gift of this lifetime. And the question is, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
Are we going to struggle and complain and compare and judge? Or are we going to just embrace this thing that we call life exuberantly and dance and create and sing and, explore? Through all manifestations, part of this book, really, the purpose of writing my book was just for fun, really. I have this particular brain and mind of mine that, kind of has fun with thoughts and ideas and articulating certain concepts. So for me, it was just an art project more than anything. So, so the question for people is, what is it that's blocking you
Yeah.
from fully embracing this life that you've been given?
Yeah. And really being aware of how we put our own barriers in our own way. That's really what it comes down to, that we can look at external circumstances, but external circumstances are always a reflection of what we've got going on inside. And so the greater clarity we have within ourselves, then the greater clarity we have within our experiences within our lives, and learning where we are free to choose and where we can let things go and where we can take things personally or not so personally, that all of that is up to us, and that we are our own greatest obstacles. And if,
Exactly.
and if we can overcome that, then life is sweet. Very, very sweet.
Absolutely. Well, and then once you really look at the obstacles and those self-created sort of boundaries that we set for ourselves, once we just take a look at that, we take a moment, sit down, quiet down, and look, we realize they don't exist. There's
Yeah.
nothing there. Just like this thing we call ego. I mean, we're talking about ego as if it was something real. Once you take a moment and really look at it and look for it within yourself, you can't find it. I mean, all you can find are maybe little blips and images and thoughts
Yeah.
and memories that we put together and say, this is me. But when you really examine that, there's nothing there. That's the notion of no self in Buddhism, that there
Yeah.
is no self. Take a look, you know.
Yeah. See if you can find it. See if you can pin it down and say, that's it right there.
Exactly. It's fleeting. It's so, so there is no really ego to get rid of because it never existed in the first place.
Yeah.
While simultaneously, and here's the non-dual stance, inhabit those structures, your inherited patterns, with joy
Yeah.
and tweak it when it's unpleasant. There's a lot of egos that are pretty unpleasant. So tweak it around, make it beautiful, make it sexy, make it fun. Because we kind of need some sort of self-identity to navigate the social realm, just like we need a body to sort of navigate this material realm.
Exactly. So,
But
so it's a necessary part of ourselves, but it's not the sum totality of ourselves. And in and of itself, it's rather ephemeral.
yes,
It's just made up of a bunch of little patterns, and they can change and they can evaporate, or you can get new ones.
right.
So it's just this continually reconfiguring tendency, but it's not in and of itself a thing, and it's not a thing that you really need to do anything about. But becoming aware of it and how it works, that's helpful. But other than that,
Yes,
you don't need to do anything with it. You don't need to do
right.
anything about it.
Exactly.
People talk about, oh, I need to kill my ego. I think, well, what good will that do you?
Right. Yeah, and seeing is the movement. Just to see and to become a witness to it is already a movement away from it.
Yeah.
Because that which you can see is not who you are, right? The object is not the subject. So for me, that's all I need to do when I get too lost in it, is to see, wait, let me see what it is. And then so then you sort of extricate yourself from that, and then you move into a sort of a deeper level. And you know what's interesting is that at the material, quote unquote, material level, it's just like that ephemeral ego. You can't pin down what we call matter. I mean, physicists are trying to figure out, well, what is the building blocks of this? And they can't find it. When you look at an atom, it's almost like looking at your quote unquote ego. There's just 99.99% empty space.
Yeah.
And the 0.0001 that is an empty space is just a vibration, a probability pattern. So even material reality is a configuration of tendencies and patterns. So really, what we call reality is more like a dream, a shifting, moving dream. And once we can tap into the source projector of that dream, then we really begin to access higher potentials for humanity, and truly embody the co-creative powers that we are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Eugene, this has been an excellent conversation. I've kept you for well over an hour now, so I'm going to go ahead and we can wrap this up. But please let our listeners know where they can find your book, and let's remind them of the title once again.
Okay, great. My book is called Dimensions of Being, An Explorer's Guide to Consciousness, and I'm at Amazon.com, Barnes and Nobles, and also you can find the website dimensionsofbeing.com. I'm kind of working on it right now, but sort of it's an unfolding process. But I want to say, Martin, that I've really enjoyed just going through your work, and I find your work very important within the entheogenic community, because you're bringing back the sort of non-dual orientation to this work. In a sense, there's sort of these two branches. One is the very shamanic, very sort of earthy and spirit-based, but then you're bringing back sort of that non-dual mystical sort of core that that a lot of our community members are sort of sometimes missing when they're getting too enthralled in the visions.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate your work and your light on all this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's been great having you on the show, Eugene. I'm really glad that we were able to connect. I apologize that it took so long, but I think it was worth the wait.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's been really fun to have this conversation with you, and I look forward to all your other podcasts and work.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Eugene.
All right, Martin. Take care.